Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
When was the last time you laughed? What if laughter was proven to be one of the greatest healers? Would you make a point of laughing more often? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to delve into the healing power of laughter is Ros Ben-Moshe. Ros is a laughter, well-being, and positivity author and academic. She's an adjunct lecturer at the School of Public Health and Psychology at Trobe University, Melbourne, where she coordinates the Laughter, Resilience, and Wellbeing online professional short courses. Ros is the author of Laughter, The Laughter Effect, How to Build Joy, Resilience, and Positivity in Your Life, and Laughing at Cancer, How to Heal with Love, Laughter, and Mindfulness. Her website, rosbenmoshe.com. Ros, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is such a wonderful topic. I've been intrigued with it for a long time. And I guess there's more studies and everything out showing that indeed it's a good medicine. How did you first become interested in laughter as a medicine?
Well, I was sort of at that fork, in my life, and I sort of thought I'd figured it all out, that the key to well-being was nutrition. But something inside me said it's a little bit more complex than that. And I decided to go back to do some postgraduate studies. And the university said, that's fine, but you need to have a little bit of, experience in more of a health promotion field. And as luck would have it, there was a World Health Promotion Conference in Melbourne, and I volunteered as a rapporteur and loved absolutely every single session. And in between all of these serious sessions, there was a laughter yoga session. So that's a simulated laughter exercises together with deep breathing and clapping. And I was thrown into this room with strangers. And for 30 minutes, I experienced the exhilaration of laughter. And what started off as, quite awkward and uncomfortable became real and very enlivening in no time at all. So I didn't quite know what I would do with this practice. However, I went back to study and I did postgrad in health promotion and a Master of Public Health. And I realized that there was so much discussion about mental health, but really what people were talking about was stress, anxiety, and depression. And I thought, what about this laughter thing? So I trained as a laughter yoga facilitator, and I realized how powerful it was. It's just this immediate shift that you can take a group of people, get them laughing, and they feel great. So that was sort of going back about 20 years ago now, that I sort of first experienced laughter as a therapeutic means.
Amazing. What are the health benefits of laughter? What all does it do for us?
Well, there are so many levels, in which we can view health, right? So, so there's the actual physiological things that are going on in the body. So, when we laugh, we breathe more. So laughter is an aerobic exercise. It's a very joyful aerobic exercise, and we know the benefits of aerobic exercise. It helps get our blood and heart pumping better because, as I say, there's a lot going on. It stimulates the immune system, which is a manual lymphatic pump. So the more you laugh, the more that lymphatic pump is stimulated. And it also cues the release of those well-being hormones to give you a dose of well-being, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And there's been some really interesting research that's been conducted. One of my favorites is one that put people through an MRI machine and got them to watch some comedy. And they realized that laughter in the brain has a very similar effect to meditation. So there are these whole of brain gamma waves are released when we laugh. So we're very much anchored into that present moment of joy.
So Bringing us back to the present moment seems to be a piece of it then.
Absolutely, because when you're laughing, you're laughing. You're not thinking about, what might have just happened 10 minutes ago, unless you're laughing about it, or worried about what may happen. You are laughing. You're anchored into that present moment. And amongst, the other sort of, physiological factors, like, it helps because it's such a potent way in which we can release endorphins, endorphins are our pain management system. So it really helps reduce pain, but not just physical pain. Laughter helps release, psychological or mental pain. That sort of feeling if you've had a really stressful day, or you're going through a really challenging time, and then something happens and you just like burst into laughter. It just helps release so much of that stress that we've been carrying.
Well,
And
I know that in a lot of your public service people, like policemen, people in the military, people in search and rescue, ambulance drivers, they all tend to, when I've been around them, use kind of a dark humor to get through the stress. What is that doing?
it's a coping mechanism. So, sometimes life is just too difficult to actually face it from a different perspective, and that sort of darkness is it just helps people just cope better with their stress, even if it's just sort of exaggerated, or it's a way of downplaying it. It's not necessarily the healthiest form of humor. However, if it works, then I suggest it's certainly, as long as they're sort of keeping that humor within their own circles, it's actually very, very powerful. And you'll often find healthcare workers, always sort of relying on that dark sense of humor, talking about that particular patient and sort of having a laugh about it.
But laughing at ourselves is good medicine too, isn't it? Being able to take ourselves lightly and find humor in ourselves.
It's very important. It really enhances our resilience to stress. So, as I say, life can be very serious. And the last thing we need when life is serious is for us to take ourselves so seriously in it. So, just to be able to even take an aspect of a particular challenge that we are facing and being able to find the funny, to be able to just, laugh about, even if it's one particular aspect. And I often say to people that are caught up in the present moment of a challenge, ask yourself, is there something perhaps in the future I might be able to laugh about this situation? Because often if we're caught up in the moment, it's very, very difficult to access that laughter, those, light emotions.
What happens if some people are pretty serious. They're just not prone to laughter, and it doesn't come easy for them. I mean, even when they're in a room full of people that are finding humor, they all tend to be a little more stoic. How can they shake loose and start to engage with humor?
It's a good question. Listen, everybody's different, and some people sort of hold, the value of being serious that much, higher than, the value of levity, for example. So nothing should ever feel forced. However, if someone wants to invite more humor into their laughter, there are many ways in which they can do that. They can, for example, spend more time connecting with friends or a loved one that, makes them feel good, that they can share a laugh with. Being on the lookout, even, cat videos, for example, maybe that's their thing. It can be, after it as, if they're sort of caught up in the news of the day, perhaps to turn down the news and to turn up the comedy. There are many things that we can do. And it also helps, laughter is a very social beast. So, connecting with others, we actually get a lot of laughter happening without the need for humor. It's something quite fascinating. There's this notion called the punctuation effect of laughter. So when we are having a conversation with someone, if there's laughter, 80% of the times it's more likely because of something that nothing particularly funny has been said as opposed to a joke. So I'll give you an example. It's like, Gwilda, do you remember about 10 minutes ago how much we were struggling to get this sound going? It was really stressful, right? So can you see how there was laughter punctuating that sentence? And what that does is it lubricates conversations. So for someone who struggles to find humor, they're not, that's not their go-to strength. Even just encouraging them to have conversations, face-to-face conversations with people, there will actually be a lot of incidental laughter that will occur. And as I say, that is known as the punctuation effect of laughter.
It's there's so many different kinds of laughter, and we're just about out of time in this segment, but I'd love to go into them later in more depth. But what about cynical laughter?
Again, I think there's a hierarchy of humor. So dark humor and cynical, I would say, is the sort of, on the scale of, lower health benefits, as opposed to, that positive humor style. So again, it's a coping mechanism. It helps people, just be able to respond to a situation, and it sort of helps quell that sort of, that potency of whatever it is that they're dealing with. However, it's not cynical humor, especially when shared, can be toxic. So I do caution against it.
Well, it is that magic moment. We're going to take a station break. Russ and I will return very shortly, so don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What tickles your funny bone? With us this hour discussing the healing power of laughter is Ros Ben-Moshe. Ros is the author of Laughter, The Laughter Effect, How to Build Joy, Resilience, and Positivity in Your Life. Ros, laughter is such a wonderful topic, but there is so many, it's so dynamic, really. And we were talking earlier about how cynical laughter or dark humor is kind of on the low scale of benefits. It has benefits, but it's kind of on the low scale. Another form of laughter I'd like to address is, do you know how when a person, they're really going through it, it's been a horrible time. I mean, maybe they've even been crying, and all of a sudden they go into an almost hysterical laughter. What's going on there?
Again, it's human emotions. They're so complex, but it just it's interesting because sometimes I'll facilitate a laughter yoga program, and I'll end with a laughter meditation. And at the end, there'll either be people sort of laughing with joy or laughing just like with tears streaming down their faces as this release. And again, it's just laughter begets laughter. So, laughter is very contagious. And when we sort of start laughing, and even if it's that sort of motivation is the release, or whether it's the joy, it just keeps maintaining itself. There's some fascinating studies that have actually sort of shown how the contagiousness of laughter, especially sort of where people almost like inappropriate, it just keeps on going because, we need to see laughter and we need to hear laughter in order for it to, be contagious. And you know how it is, it's like if you go into a room and there are people crying, that's going to impact you and you're going to feel like bursting into tears. And the same thing happens, if you're going into a room. That's why comedy clubs are so successful, because, as I say, laughter begets laughter. So, yes.
Well, when we're going to a funeral, say for instance, the Celts there was three harpers. It was a story of three harpers. First, they would go into deep grief, then they would go into hysterical laughter, but the process wasn't done until someone played the lullaby. That's calm at the end.
Wow.
What's operating there?
That's really interesting. I think it's actually mimicking, that what's going on with that sort of phase of grief. Initially, you have that sort of more gravity, and then you just have that release because it just gets too much, and then you're calming down. That's actually beautiful. I've never heard about that before. So I think it's a really wonderful way of being kind to your nervous system, really, allowing it to sort of pass through those sort of phases of, that sort of grief, and then the riotous laughter, and then calming it right down. So yes, it's fascinating. I know when it came to my late father's funeral, I know that I invoked laughter, through the eulogy that I gave, and I know how powerful that was in terms of people who'd come to pay their respect, that they were sort of taken by surprise, because not every culture has that tradition of being able to laugh, to celebrate someone's life. And I think that it was a very powerful thing to be able to lead a community using laughter, just drip fed throughout, sort of not quite like you were describing, but similar principle.
Sometimes people will go into laughter as a defense mechanism. Okay. Is that still effective? When they just kind of throw in laughter when they're nervous or whatever?
Again, it comes to this, the health benefits that you have. So again, it's important for some people because it helps diminish their anxiety. Is it something that I'm going to recommend to everyone? Not so much. So the two sort of most positive humour styles that are associated with positive wellbeing are self-enhancing and affiliative. So they're the ones that actually make you feel better. They're enhancing yourself, or they bring you close to another person. So perhaps in the instance that you were describing, someone, with that anxious laughter, it actually helps to, as I say, it's first for them, but it also helps them relate to other people.
So laughter, as you said, can actually change our brain chemistry. What all goes on there exactly?
So, as most people are pretty aware about, those stress hormones, and the reality is that most of us, in any day, there is a certain level of stress that we experience. So, the hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, they'll be, filtering through our system. So what happens when we smile, like authentically smile or laugh, is we actually cue those quartet of happy hormones, as I say, dopamine. So that's gives you that sort of hit. It's like, yes, someone's laughing with me, someone's smiling with me. Oxytocin, which is the molecule of trust or the molecule of love. When we smile or laugh with one another, we are signaling that there's comfort in connecting with that particular person. So we're releasing oxytocin, and we're also releasing serotonin, which is our body's own antidepressant. And then the endorphins, which are our, as I said earlier, they are our body's endogenous morphine. They're our body's internal source of, pain management. And endorphins are actually 30 times more powerful than the synthetic version. So this explains why, when they've done research with people experiencing pain, and they haven't exactly like slapped them around or anything. They've put their hand in a sleeve of ice, ice cold water, and they've observed how long they can withhold their arm in the ice cold water. And they've found that people who were given the opportunity to laugh beforehand, through comedy or even laughter yoga, an intentional laughter practice, they could withstand the pain more. And that's because they've been releasing those endorphins. So these are these neurotransmitters of well-being that happen, and they just flow. But they don't necessarily last as long as the stressful ones can linger longer, which is why it's really important to timetable moments of levity into one's day to help sort of manage, and suppress some of those, stressful hormones.
You mentioned that when we laugh, okay, it makes all these changes, and that there is a bit of a difference when you're forcing a laugh versus spontaneous laughter. How does laughter yoga work?
Sure. So I don't, as I said, I don't recommend forcing anything. It's all about choice. So laughter yoga is a very interesting modality. It came onto the scene in the 1990s. There was an Indian doctor, Dr. Madan Kataria, and he was researching for a medical journal about laughter being the best medicine. And he came up, he found quite a few studies, and he thought, well, if there's all this research, like, why aren't we doing more of it? And he decided to gather a group of 5 people in a Mumbai park and tell jokes. And they did for about an hour, and they had a riotous time. And there was much, much laughter, and they decided that they would meet the next day. So they did. And there were more jokes told. The group grew a little bit, and they decided to meet again the next day. But what you can imagine is that the jokes started to run out. And what one person found funny, another person didn't get it at all, or they found it offensive. So Dr. Kataria essentially went back to the drawing board. And he was he remembered reading a book by Emrika Pattis, who suggested this idea of acting as if you are happy in order to be happy. And this thought had stuck with him. And his wife, Madhuri, was a seasoned yogi. And she said, well, laughter's, breath work. So how about, you think about, including some breath work into what you do. So he essentially decided to just come up with just some laughter exercises. So for example, one of the first ones was a namaste, where you have your hands, together in the namaste position, and you go around with it, greeting everybody, just and what starts off as feeling, oh, I need to sort of laugh in this namaste position, becomes real in no time at all. And laughter yoga, since that time that it began in the park, now has ballooned into a movement with over 10,000 laughter yoga clubs, both in person and online. And there are a range of different laughs. They've been modified by different cultures. There'll be different laughs, for example, in Rwanda to LA. But they all, have this same formula, that you don't rely on humor in order to get the laughter happening. And this is particularly important for, in a therapeutic sense, because when we're going through challenging times, one of the first things that goes out the door is laughter, is those feel-good emotions. So laughter yoga enables us to laugh for purely the health reasons. And hopefully we'll get to be able to talk a little bit about more, some of the research that I've conducted using laughter yoga in populations that you would not expect it.
Yes, we're about to have another break here, but on the other side, I'd really love to go into that with you. But right now it is time for that station break. Ros and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What is the purpose of laughter? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us to share a laugh is Ros Ben-Moshe. Her website, rosbenmoshe.com. Ros, what is the purpose of laughter? We have, all our emotions have a reason to be there. Anger kind of sets our boundaries, et cetera, et cetera. What is the purpose, the underlying purpose of laughter?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gwilda. Well, it really is one of our superpowers in order to connect with people. We ha 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 before we da 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 or ma ma ma. So it really is one of the earliest ways in which we can sort of get the attention of our caregivers. And rather than sort of, them dealing with the endless stream of nappies and crying, they get this beautiful reward of a smile or a laugh. It makes it all worthwhile. So laughter really is the sort of glue between people. And it's amazing, if you are, in a room with strangers, you just, smile at someone, or you share a laugh, you have built this bridge of connection. It's one of the easiest ways of doing something, and it's a form of communication, but it's a non-verbal communication, which means it has a very universal application as well.
It's amazing because babies, they come hardwired to laugh, don't they? I mean, there's nothing
Yes.
nothing that cheers me up more than a
Yeah.
giggling baby, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, what's the difference between humor and non-humor based laughter?
Mm. So, humor based laughter, and certainly research in that area, is about the comedy. It's relying on humor. So, it's very subjective. So, for example, you might, everybody has a different sense of humor. So, you might sort of sit down and have your go to comedy, and you might invite a friend over, and they're thinking, why is she laughing? Like, I just don't get it. So, humor is fantastic when it works, right? But there's inhumor, but the benefit of non-humor based laughter is actually just working with this sort of laughter for laughter's sake, choosing to laugh and then for the feelings to follow. So rather than being happy and laughing, you laugh in order to be happy. So that's where laughter yoga is an example of intentional laughter. But we don't have to sort of get join a laughter yoga group in order to stimulate intentional laughter. We can, for example, one of the favorite things that I do is I call them traffic light laughter moments. So, if you are caught up in traffic and you have to stop at another traffic light and you're running late and you're stressed, rather than sort of looking at that red light and thinking, oh my gosh, another red light, you think, okay, this is an opportunity for me to breathe, for me to smile, and perhaps even, to laugh out loud. Now, laughter is a very vulnerable act. People don't like to sort of be, looked as, oh, that person's laughing out of turn, or, you can feel a little bit uncomfortable. However, if you are laughing in the comfort of your own car, any passerby or person in the next car is just going to assume you're laughing with a friend. So it's a very safe way in which we can actually intentionally get laughter happening. And I'm talking about a number of seconds, like literally, red light, breathe, smile. It changes our physiology just like that.
It's pretty much amazing. So, what is the latest research in humor and non-humor based laughter
Mm.
therapy?
Well, it's interesting. The main type of laughter therapy up until the early 2000s was all humor based. And then, as I say, Dr. Kataria introduced laughter yoga into the scene. And what that did was it has now increased the number of laughter research programs. And it's a much easier way to dose. To sort of control that sort of dose of laughter. So we have got laughter. When you are relying on humor, you don't know how much someone's going to laugh in a particular 30-minute period. So one of the main areas in which we've got a burgeoning of new research is in anxiety and depression. No surprise really there, because obviously it's one of the major issues that we as a society, global society, are experiencing. And it's, there has been research that has demonstrated that simulated laughter, so that non-humor based laughter is actually more effective in some cases than some of the prescription drugs for the same thing, which is not, I'm not saying throw away your prescription drugs. I'm just saying that when we can activate up to 15 minutes of laughter, it really changes our physiology profoundly. And there is, as I say, there's a growing amount of research that is demonstrating that.
Well, you brought up drugs, so I'm going to follow down that rabbit hole. In the casualties of the 60s and 70s, a lot of people started smoking cannabis, and some strains of cannabis would really tickle people's funny bones. They'd be laughing over things that people that aren't smoking are looking at him like, oh, I don't know what's getting into those two people. but it would be, they get caught up into it and be just absolutely hilarious laughter. Is that effective, or is it being drug induced a disadvantage?
I'll be honest with you, it's not my area of expertise. I mean, the bottom line is that I always sort of say, if you can get something naturally, that's always the best way in which you can get it. Does it serve a purpose? Sure, it might social, connections. It might help reduce stress. However, I would always advocate that the natural type.
Well, you mentioned that the serotonin that the body makes is how many times more powerful and potent and effective than something that's uh, given to you in a drug.
That's right. That's right. Endorphins, they're extraordinary.
Pretty amazing. So
and they are opiates. Sorry to interrupt. That's what's happening is that they are a type of opiate. So we are actually, through simulated laughter, spontaneous laughter, we are actually tapping into our own natural opiates, which is what the synthetic versions they're spending lots of money trying to actually mimic what we can generate very naturally ourselves.
Just go look at something funny. Simple solution, right?
Yes.
Okay. So is laughter used in hospital settings? In where is this coming down to the pavement? Where is it being used?
So community health groups, it's certainly being used a lot in aged care. For example, I in Australia was involved in a research study where we introduced laughter yoga activities into residential aged care facilities, and I ended up training 120 plus lifestyle staff to facilitate laughter programs in their centres. So aged care, it's certainly quite popular. There has been research done in hospitals, and it's happening, in various pockets of the world. I was involved in one particular research project, would you believe, with dialysis patients. So we are talking about people with some of the lowest sort of, disability lifestyle, years. And the first time I sort of walked into a dialysis ward, I thought, how are we going to be able to get the laughter happening here? However, it was an example of not necessarily being able to sit for people to be able to see other people laughing, because you've got these huge blood bank machines that they're propped up, and you've got one arm that's attached to the machine. But because the laughter was being heard, it spread so much so that people who were walking, down the corridor of the hospital would sort of poke their head in and think, what's going on in here? What's so there are definite. It's I can't exactly say it's mainstream, and there are some types of health situations you wouldn't be recommending laughter. So I had a personal experience of bowel cancer. Let me tell you, I physically could not laugh for several weeks after major abdominal surgery. So you would not want to get laughter therapists into a ward that, of people who've just had major abdominal surgery. It would be counterproductive.
To say the least, yes. Well, we're about out of time in this segment, believe it or not. Time's flying here. But when we're using humor, how does it affect our social relationships? How does it affect our inner relationships? Laughter and humor.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's interesting, if you were to go on a dating app, one of in the top one or two things that people are looking for, it's a sense of humor. And it's one of the things that has been shown that, if couples who laugh together stay together. And the same thing can be said about, friendships. So it's a very important way in which we can build that stronger connection, develop that sort of in jokes and, common sense of humor, what we laugh at. And it's important to work at it, so, to identify your type of humor. And perhaps if your partner doesn't enjoy your particular type of humor, then, you can substitute with a friend that you can always make sure that you get that sort of laughter happening. But it's also important, as a couple or as a friendship, to try new things out, to go to a comedy club or go, watch a light-hearted film or create memories that you're going to be able to laugh about in the future.
Well, it is that magic moment for another station break. Please stay with us as Roz and I continue to explore the power of humor. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What if you have no sense of humor? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Ros Ben-Moshe. Her website, rosbenmoshe.com. Roz, what happens if you have no sense of humor? I mean, you'd think everybody does, but I've seen some people that are awfully, awfully stern. How do you shake it loose?
How do you shake it loose? Well, first, I mean, just like many things, there is no fixed point to our sense of humor. So if you want to enhance your humor, you can. So it's all about sort of, whatever you focus on, whatever you place your attention on, that's what grows. So if you want to grow your sense of humor, first, I think you need to identify what you find amusing. And it's really interesting, obviously this is an area that I've been working in for many years, and I'll talk with very serious people and I'll sort of say, what do you find funny? What makes you laugh? And I'll get, this very serious manager to say, well, to be honest, I really have a thing for, cat videos. Or I was speaking to someone recently and, quite a serious type. And he really surprised me. He said, I love watching babies laugh. And I like, I look out for like clips of babies, chuckling away. And that really makes my day. So, it's as individual as we all are. I think that it's really important when it comes to, believing that we don't have a sense of humor or not using it is challenging those, limiting beliefs and knowing that, if it's something that we hold dear, we can change it. So, there's I recommend to people who, for example, who are struggling with expressing their sense of humor to compile a humor scrapbook. So basically go out, buy yourself a scrapbook and fill it either with funny quotes, funny photos, write down, a funny happening that might have, you might have experienced during the week, and add to this humor scrapbook. And that means on days where you're feeling a little bit more serious, you can either get immersed, in those, things that you have identified, or contribute more. So there is much we can do, but it really depends on how much we want to do it, how much we value that sense of humor.
You wrote a book, I believe the title is Laughing at Cancer. Would you share a little bit about your experience that led to that?
Sure. So I'd already been a laughter yoga facilitator for around, I think, about 5 years. And I was also lecturing in health promotion and public health. And to be honest with you, I was really good at preaching about laughter being the best medicine. Anyone who'd come, I'd present to, I'd say, you just laugh more. It's really good for you. Let's laugh. And then out of the blue, I got a bowel cancer diagnosis. So this was a time in my life where, firstly, there's nothing funny about a cancer diagnosis. I certainly was not in the mood for laughing. I was 42 going on 43. I was very much looking forward to a very full life ahead of me. I had 2 young boys, not so young, but 12 and 15, and my partner. And I really, this thing that had been, I'd taken for granted my whole life, laughter, was taken away from me. And it was a fascinating time in that I had been I hadn't really done a lot of corporate work, but I actually had been booked for a corporate ladies lingerie company to facilitate, a mid-year party for them, using laughter yoga. And this was 3 days, turned out to be 3 days prior to major bowel surgery.
Mm.
And I thought I really should cancel, but it was such late notice. I thought I didn't feel right about that. And I walked into this room and, 30 plus excitable women and, a variety of lingerie displayed and blah, blah, blah. And I, went through, the usual spiel of, the health benefits of laughter. And then I spent, the 30 minutes doing laughter yoga with them. So simulated laughter exercises, clapping and deep breathing. And after that 30 minutes, it was the first time that I actually acknowledged that I needed this practice much more than the people I was facilitating it for. And it enabled me to go into that, almost 6-hour surgery just with a little less of that sort of heaviness that had descended upon diagnosis. And then I found that, I couldn't, I had a plan. It's like, okay, after surgery, I'm going to laugh lots. Well, that plan went out the door. I could barely breathe. So this was really, I suppose, the time in which the genesis of the laughter effect began, in that I had to think about other ways in which I could tap into this energy of laughter, into this energy of joy without physically laughing. So that's sort of what became my first book, Laughing at Cancer. I journaled, and every opportunity I had, I would try and, find any silver lining. I would reframe things. So, cancer is often referred to as the big C. I refer to it as the little c. And that was really important, not only for my own well-being and healing. It meant that, yes, there was a malignant tumor in my rectum, but the rest of me was healthy. And that was very empowering. And it also helped diminish some of the stress that my boys were feeling. It's like, Mum doesn't have the big C. She's just got the little c. So, there, and then, the operation that I had 4 months, I had a full bowel resection because it's the only way you can test whether the cancer has spread. And for 4 months, I also had an ileostomy, which is a sac you wear on the outside of your belly to process your waste. And after 4 months, the operation is called a bowel, a reversal. And I decided, no, I don't like that terminology. It sounded inherently negative, going backwards. So I reframed it as a bowel reconnection. Mm-hmm. And, these sorts of things, or, just finding things, that I could smile about in my day. And I think it's really important for people to understand that when you are going through adversity, no matter the specifics of it, you need to tap into micro moments, small moments that you can really enhance your joy. And so for me, it might have been adding just some smiling to my regular meditation practice. It might have been just really savoring that opportunity to have a lovely conversation with a friend. Or even just in the morning, if I was feeling particularly flat, just appreciating hot water coming out of the faucet.
So it is getting close to the end of the show, and I don't want to close it without asking you, Ros, what is your mission?
I'm on a laughter mission. I am really on a mission to demonstrate to people that we cannot leave feel-good emotions, smiling and laughter to chance. We need to timetable moments for smiling and laughter and levity in our day. The more we do that, the more we actually create neural pathways that are, directed towards, joy. And we really need to seize the moment, and we need to tune in. Every day is different. Sometimes we might need to actually have a belly laugh. Sometimes, we might need to just have more of a quiet smile. Sometimes, it might be about having a conversation, and always starting the day by placing a heartfelt smile on your face. No matter what the day may present, it's signaling to your whole physiology just that, sense of ease, and will make whatever comes your way that much easier. So really building that toolkit of resilience, for these things.
Do you believe that their humor can be found in any situation?
You can find it. I mean, it's, what you seek, you see. So if you seek to find it, you'll find it.
And isn't that kind of a key? Is a change of the way we perceive things? Isn't that the key to finding humor?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the key to any sort of these feel good, positive emotions, because they tend to be less obvious. So, we really need to pay attention to them. And as I say, what we place our attention on, what we focus on, that is what grows. And necessarily, then there's less space for the other, less, health supporting things to sort of creep in.
Do you find journaling very helpful in starting to make that switch over to a finding humor versus the downside and everything?
So powerful, so very powerful. It's amazing. I actually find pen and paper is actually even more powerful than tapping away on a laptop. There must be something about the eye brain connection or something. It's really important because you can always say, okay, I'm going through this time. Can I view this challenging time through the lens of awe, or through the lens of gratitude, or through the lens of humor? And when you are actually, journaling about it, it's amazing what comes out. It really is.
It is amazing. Well, unfortunately, this has just flown by, but we're out of time, Ross.
Oh,
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
thank you so much. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you. Our guest this hour has been Ros Ben-Moshe. Ros is the author of numerous books, including The Laughter Effect, How to Build Joy, Resilience, and Positivity in Your Life. To find out more about Ros, where you can get her books, visit her website, rosbenmoshe.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy our past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But most importantly, please be sure to join us right here next time. This mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.